Good morning. Good morning, Bitcoiners. I don't think the Rumble is working again. It said it was going to work. It was so close today. I'm looking at it. My comment is working, but the video is not playing. So who knows? The sun is up, although not the nicest sunrise today. We didn't get much color, kind of gray, kind of dreary. But the good news is Bitcoin's running, so we can have our coffee and talk about the news. A bit of a cold coffee this morning, but that's okay. A bit of a cold coffee. So today we're going to be talking all about World War III, and I've got a great board. But let's start with some super fake news. This is on the good side of fake news. So Bono, it turns out, is not as dumb as a lot of us thought. This is what he said yesterday. This is Bono, the lead singer of U2, right? Who I thought had one of the lowest IQs of anyone who speaks publicly. Oh, just a second. We got children in the house, right? We got lovely children, who I'll take out for a little walk if it doesn't rain too much today, but we'll see after this. So I underestimated Bono. This is a quote from him. I ended up as an activist in a very different place from where I started. I thought that if we just redistributed resources, then we could solve every problem. I know now that it's not true. Well, great, Bono, great. We love to hear it, right? We love to hear it. What's up, Audio Innovation? Good morning. Now, I met Bono one time. He came by Parliament and was on one of these World Economic Forum stupid things where he went around talking about all kinds of nonsense. And I think it was landmines or something. Not that that's, I don't want to, minimize what an issue landmines are, but it's one of those issues that just caught on with celebrities and then went around the world, ranting about it. And of course, in Canada, you have a great audience for that because Canada might be one of the stupidest countries in the world. I mean, it's really, really filled with idiots. I'm from Canada, so I can say that. I know it. And here's two great examples. Here's two hilarious examples. So they've already got a health minister who they just hate after COVID. Trudeau's health minister, like she's hated, right? She's hated. Of course, masks and the flight stuff and all the other mischief she got into. So she had a quote yesterday, a tweet saying, "Climate action is public health action. Let's boldly act together now." So basically drawing that line between public health and climate change that every Bitcoiner predicted would be the next pivot for these health ministers. So obviously the Canadian one falls right into everyone's expectation and everyone's prediction. Now, remember in Canada, they had the trucker event back in February and March. And in the end, they had to use the martial law for one purpose. It was to get into people's bank accounts and take their money and all these things. So right now, there's an inquiry in Canada over the use of martial law, because the thing about martial law is it has to be the last resort according to the Canadian rules that are put in place around the enactment of what they call the Emergencies Act. But basically, the other levels of government have to declare that they have insufficient powers to stop it. So that's where everything's hinging on right now. So they have police and all these kinds of people. So there's a bit of a fight. The state police said, no, we were okay. We didn't need the federal Emergencies Act to come in, and we didn't need the national martial law because the bank thing was not important to us. So they got all these inquiries, they got everyone coming up, police officers, and who knew what when, but they had an amazing quote yesterday. So we don't care. I mean, it's going to be a kangaroo court, and they'll probably never find anything other than enough wiggle room for Trudeau to squeeze out. Because the thing about Canada is, here's the thing that makes it different than the United States especially. Canada had, before the internet, a lot of problems creating its own internal national media because most Canadians can just consume American stuff, and therefore there's a ton of subsidies already in our news media. And those were able to be preserved through the dawn of the internet and actually become strengthened. So there's a bunch of laws in Canada about consuming national content because Canadians are very worried that American television broadcasts and culture will overwhelm Canadian culture as if it hasn't happened already. There's all these different groups and media things, and they all get money. They're all subsidized. So the government has already bought the entire media infrastructure in Canada. So in that sense, it's very different than the United States. Now, in the United States, everyone is on a team and it's a team sport. It looks more like sports now, right? Fox and CNN and people's opinions. Whenever I see those riots, you know, whenever you see like Proud Boys and Antifa, that's just sports. It's just the people whose brains have been filled by the different media channels, and then they have players and they wear uniforms and they go and wrestle and fight. You know, it's sports. It's just sports. And I look at it like sports, right? If ever I see, oh, like on Twitter, there's a bunch of videos of fights right now. You know, you check in on it the way you would check in on sports, not like obviously for information or what are they mad about? Who cares, right? It's just like, oh, game's on. But here's what they said about the Canadian during the inquiries. This is just a fun quote to show how stupid some Canadians are, right? This is what happens when you have an entirely subsidized media. You can go in public, you can say this in public. You can say these words in public in a trial where everyone will hear it and it's recorded and part of a record. This is a police officer, right? This is the chief of police. And he's talking about, if you remember, one of the big concerns was the gas jerry cans that were being brought from citizens, right? People were just filling up jerry cans of gas and bringing it to all of the trucks that were running and sitting idle on the street and all that stuff, so that they wouldn't have to shut down. They would have fuel and they could heat their homes, right? Because they were sleeping in these things. So the gas jerry cans, and it became a movement. People were bringing empty ones and water, and it was a big game, and a lot of people thought it was funny. But now in this inquiry, it's sort of one of the major issues of contention. But here it is. Here's the quote that this person said in public. Doing this, right, bringing the jerry cans and propane, would mean that the protesters could have been hurt and injured due to their own freedom. We had to do it because their own freedom was going to hurt them. So we had to take away the gas, right? So pretty fun. Now, another fake news story that caught my eye, and this one has been was shared quite a bit yesterday, and you should have a look. It's a picture of the previous party leaders in England, because, you know, they just had a new prime minister, right? Rishi Sunak. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Pardon me. I wish I could. I haven't heard it yet accurately, so I'll continue to look for how to pronounce it correctly. Goldman guy, you know, prefers bored apes, I guess, over crypto punks, and doesn't have an opinion on Bitcoin and ETH. So, you know, that's what we're dealing with here. But nevertheless, you know, he's the leader. And the point here is that there's been this contrast of Conservative Party leaders and their Labour Party, so their Liberal Party leaders, right? So they put all the faces in a row of each of the leaders. And here's the context. So the Labour Party is all white men, and that goes back to like 1980, right? In the 1980s, it's all white men in a row. It's like 7 white guys in a row, 7 old white guys in a row. Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, you know, you get a bunch of these characters, including the current one. And they're the party of equality, right? They're the party of equality, and the Conservatives are the mean racists, right? They're the mean racists. Well, what? So it's all these white guys, and then the Conservative leaders, back to the 80s, Margaret Thatcher, it's a woman, 2 white guys, another woman, a white guy, another woman, and now Rishi Sunak, who I'm guessing is probably Indian or Pakistani, or, you know, I don't know, but I think he's from around there, or his parents or ancestors or whoever. And so this is from Adrian Hilton. The Party of Equality reasons this away with Conservatives manifesting the wrong kind of diversity. Better to be led by white men who are progressive than by women who are not sisters, or by people of color who are privately educated and are superficially black and brown. So it's just great. I don't think it means anything. It's just funny, right? It's just hilarious. So there you go. So today we're going to be talking about China, and I've got a board here. And this is really the belligerents. You see, whenever you look at wars, they're always mentioned belligerents, like who was on which side. What I'm suggesting is that World War III, which we're in, is actually a 3-party war. There's 3 different sides to this war. And you can think of that in terms of, if you, I don't know if any of you follow, what's his name? I got a bunch of his quotes here. He's like, one of the people I follow the most in the world, and I can't remember his name. And Balaji, of course, Balaji. I don't know why I can't remember his name. I've been following Balaji for years, right? Love Balaji. Balaji can go off on tangents, but I like that he says it all out loud, puts it on paper, shows his work, makes predictions, gets some right, gets some wrong, right? But nevertheless, that's what we try to do on this show. We try to show our work, why we're getting predictions. We put them out there, and we'll see if we're right or wrong. But Balaji did the Lex Friedman podcast just before Kanye. So Kanye did it, and now, of course, I watched Lex Friedman. I don't watch a ton of Lex Friedman stuff, but having watched Kanye now, the algorithms are just pumping all kinds of stuff. And it turned out that Balaji had just gone on, I guess, the day before, or 2 or 3 days before Kanye. So they spoke something like 7 hours straight or something. I have not watched the whole thing, but I did watch his piece on China and world wars and where we're headed and what's going on in the world, right? And he puts out a vision that looks exactly like this, except instead of Abel's, what I've named them, he calls these just the internet people, right? The people on the internet, and he goes into a bit of Web3 stuff. So we're going to reframe that because it's not totally useful, and it's the way he sees it as a VC and an entrepreneur. And we're going to put it in Bitcoin terms today to sort of line up how we think about it. But we're going to start with all these stories about Xi and the recent Communist Party Congress. So we've talked about it a bunch on the show. They meet every couple of years and they reestablish who's in the Politburo. It's kind of like a pyramid, right? You've got the leader, he's got like a 7 or 8 person Politburo below him, and then they've got a larger council of something like 25 people, but it's one less. Some people think this Hu Jintao, this former leader that got escorted, while we've watched it, we talked about it here, he could have just been pooping himself, right? That's a legit way to look at it. And it actually is probably the more likely scenario from a certain perspective. He's old. It explains a lot of what you see. But another one is the following. That council that had 25 people normally or something like that, at the last minute, one person was excluded. And instead of another person joining, because all this stuff is predetermined, right? All this stuff is predetermined. That's why the orchestration of Hu off the stage, a lot of people think it can't have been because of the poop, because everything is set in China, and people wouldn't allow that kind of a show and spectacle to happen without some reason. So here it is. This is the credible explanation of what's going on there without Hu pooping himself, right? So the actual credible piece is this: that group that had 25 people now has 24 this time. They're not going to run the full 25. And it looks like the mini Hu had one guy that was going to be there. It was going to be his top-ranking faction member, right? His top-ranking faction member. Now, if you want to know, there's 3 factions in China. There's Xi, there's Jiang Zemin, right? The guy with the big glasses who was the president in the late 90s, early 2000s. He's the guy who controls the secret police and is the one who organized the organ harvesting of the Falun Gong. He was really the enemy of the Falun Gong. And now, Hu took over after. And Hu has this little rump, something like the youth delegation or something. So it's not a powerful third-party situation, right? The factions are really Jiang Zemin and Xi. And then Hu, right? Hu has this third one. So here's the rumor. And I don't know if it's true, but the rumor looks like this. It's that one of those, the 25 person spots, right? The 25 spots they had in this, in the third in control of the hierarchy, reduced it to 24. The reason is Hu didn't get his little Hu onto that one. And he only found out live and in person. So everything he'd been lobbying for was not there. And if you see some of the breakdowns, there's like some papers on that he wants this paper, he wants that paper, because he's basically trying to say, like, well, my guy's not here. This is a surprise to me. And he was going to make a scene because his guy wasn't there. That's the rumor right now. I don't know. But that's the rumor. Nevertheless, the context of it is that each of those levels now, the leader, the Politburo, and below, are totally Xi. There are no more Jiang Zemin people around. There are no more Hu people around. It's Xi up and down all around. Total control of the Communist Party. Now, a lot of articles being written about that, right? What are we going to do with him so strong? He's now wrested complete control. It looks like they're going to put a wolf warrior diplomacy is what the Wall Street Journal calls it today. The wolf warrior diplomacy, and the article from Jonathan Chang is China's Xi Jinping sets to give wolf warrior diplomacy more bite. And a lot of people trying to analyze what this means. Well, we're gonna do it today. We think that this is basically a good thing, right? A stronger Xi at least puts the cards out about what's going on in the world, and it looks a little bit like this. So it turns out that Xi knows more about Chinese demographics than anyone in the world, right? And just like the economic data that's being suppressed, which we're going to talk about in a second, it looks like the demographic data was also suppressed. They did a count a few years ago about the actual population, because it's 1 billion and something people. They've been estimating for a long time. And it turns out that they have about 100 million less people, 100 million fewer people than they actually thought. And all of these 100 million people come from the below 35. They're missing from the 35 and below demographic. They're from after the one-child policy. So they're not from the ones they already counted that are old. They're from the new people. So they're even less fecund. They produce less people than they actually thought originally. And this has a lot of implications. If you listen to Peter Zeihan, right? Peter Zeihan, who is one of the few hates Bitcoin people that I follow because I find a lot of his perspective interesting. His hatred of Bitcoin comes from an arrogance, I would suppose, about the possibility of what we're doing. So he kind of laughs and mocks at it. But as far as geopolitical stuff, I've been a big fan of his for a long time. And his whole idea is that the world has undergone a very gentle period in its history because America was so much more powerful than any other country that it policed all commercial lanes unilaterally and allowed everyone to be successful. So think about it like this. Japan through losing World War II, Germany through losing World War II, China through going through its whole revolution, all of them got what they've always wanted in their entire history from America by losing to America. Japan got access to global markets. Germany got access to global markets. That's why they went in World War II in the first place, right? They had lost to their neighbors about colonies and access and where they were going to go and what they were going to do. And so they said, well, the heck with this. We got to tip over the apple cart and start over. Right? This doesn't work for us. So we want access. We want to get all this stuff. Japan, of course, very similar. China has been trying to get off its shores for hundreds of years. It can't, right? It's got belligerents all around it. It was very difficult. It's not the same as America. America has both oceans and can leave anywhere in any direction, it feels like, right? China has one way out, and they've got Japan on one side. They've got all kinds of islands. So they're kind of trapped there. But America gave them what they didn't have to work for, right? Global access to markets. Zeihan has been arguing that once America retracts and moves away from this scenario, that everyone's going to have to fight for the bone that was given to them, and they won't get it for free anymore. And so his prediction for a long time has been that once America's missing from the scenario, there's going to be all kinds of trouble and mischief. Now, his point of view on China is the following. He's the one who's been who mentions these population statistics. So what he says is the reason why Xi is going naked, blatant, ethnocentric, militaristic, cult of personality with the total naked autocratic control of COVID zero COVID policy, which is just locking everyone down on the whim, is because they've already lost. The demographics are in, and Xi is the only one who knows it. And there is no more promise of economic growth. It won't work. He knows it won't work, right? They can't perpetuate the Jiang Zemin. Everyone who came after Mao, Jiang Zemin in particular, not a nice guy, the guy who invented the organ harvesting stuff with the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong. He was able to deliver economic growth, employment. And now that that's the case, we're in a different world. Now, we see that all these economic metrics, right? All these economic metrics are being suppressed. They're not putting them out, right? We've got Noah Smith, who we like to laugh at from time to time, but Noah Smith today writes, "The end of the system of the world." So he wrote this yesterday on Substack. And he's arguing that the system of the world, right, from 2001 to 2021, after the end of the Cold War, was the United States basically in this relationship with China. And he describes it as the following: Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao held firmly in the course that Deng Xiaoping, who handpicked them as his successors, had laid out for them. Economically, China pursued reform and opening up, while militarily and diplomatically, it chose to hide its strength and bide its time. Now, what Noah Smith is arguing is that the whole thing is done. We're never going to get back to China and America, Chimerica, as many people called it, right? He mentions Chimerica many times in the article and says that there's no way that the system is going to continue. So, and that's where Balaji comes in and says, right, that the third group, this internet group, is actually going to rise and start to be able to play alongside these guys. And he brings up, Noah doesn't say that. Noah makes a bunch of predictions. Oh, America is going to go to Vietnam, and America is going to go to India, all true and likely. My personal prediction is they're going to rebuild China in Mexico and Latin America, where the demographics are exactly what America wants. Young people, they had a millennial generation down there. They didn't have one child. They're the only other part of the world that has this millennial generation like America. Europe didn't get it, right? America had a lot of babies in the millennial generation. The millennials actually outnumber the boomers, right? It's very unique in the world because of immigration, right? That's why, you know, immigration is a bad fit for the anti-immigration thing is a really bad fit for the Republicans going forward. Doesn't mean open borders. It probably means America adopting the Canadian system, which is just a point system, right? You do this, you get a point. You do that, you get a point. You speak English, you get points. You go to college, you get points. You have a job offer, you get points. All those kinds of points. You know, it's just points. That basically Trump's immigration plan was Canada's. Right? Just give points, and then you know you get good people. So it looks like having a strong G, right? A strong G actually means that they can't compete anymore in any other economic realm. Basically, it's them admitting that Chimerica and their ability to be in this relationship with America is over, and they got to take another tact. Now, the depressing part of this is it actually makes the likelihood of a Taiwanese invasion way greater than it ever was. Way greater. As in, like, it could never have happened a couple of years ago, but with these new demographic numbers, with the only way to keep control, either lockdowns or intense ethno-nationalism, then you're in a situation where they might have to go just because it's the only way to satisfy the demands that you've created and induced in your own population to express the nationalism, right? So there's that whole big specter there. So they're not publishing economic data anymore. They're definitely pumping up ethno-nationalism in the country, and it looks like a blatant play. Now, that whole sign piece, you remember the sign, the protests that went out on that bridge in Beijing? We've talked about that a few times here. It's now becoming a much bigger deal. You've got this on Colette this morning. A single spark in the age of the internet can the Sitong Bridge. Warriors' protests make a difference. And in the article, he goes through all of the places where it's happening, where people are copying it, where people are writing about it. And they even had, they call him Xi Jinping, the country thief, right? They call him the country thief. And it's caught on in a very similar way to the way the Falun Gong protests caught on years ago, where they hijacked the television station and were able to broadcast alone for about 10 minutes, something like that. And it caused people to go out on the streets thinking the government had been deposed, that revolution was upon them, and they had this whole new change. And it didn't work out that way. It was just a one-off. But This sign now has caused another form of suppression in China. You know, they can go in and take words out. Who is now, who hasn't been erased, but the video of who being taken out has been erased in China. But that was fed to foreign journalists, it looks like, because it happened right when the foreign journalists came in. So the new suppressed language over there is "I saw it." Right? If you say "I saw it" on WeChat or whatever, it gets erased. Right? So people can't even say they saw these signs. So it's just to show you that things are moving quickly. Here's a bit of fake news in Forbes. If you follow this model that we're going to talk about in a second, if you follow this model in Forbes today, they had an article saying that as Russia gets weaker, Xi Jinping may forego Taiwan to grab Eastern Russia. Nope. Can't imagine that, because as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, as part of their strategy here, they're going to have to guarantee certain resources, certain provisions, certain commercial relationships that they just can't get rid of that easily. So now we have that single spark story, and as well as the end of the world that Noah Smith wrote about, basically being from 2001 to 2021, and things changing after. So what does this all mean? Well, here's the way I see it all breaking down. And this is a little bit about what Balaji said, and the way you can actually start imagining it. So you've got three parties in this war, right? You've got the Axis, you've got the Allies, who, if you say it in the Arabic, like Allah, right, it becomes the All-Lies, right? The All-Lies, right? So you've got the Gs, right? You got the Axis, Gs, and then you got the Chinese characters. You've got the All-Lies, and then you've got the Ables, right? And the Ables are really the people that can navigate the internet, that understand Bitcoin, that understand that the monetary system that these other countries have gone with creates certain issues, and we'll talk about it right now. So the Axis looks like it's going to build its money off of the BRICS configuration, right? Saudi is now going to participate in BRICS. What they're actually trying to do here is create a commodity-based currency. And if they get the commodity-based currency, it will actually have a counterbalance to a lot of the US dollar, the petrodollar aspects of it, right? Because all that fiat world is just relative to itself, right? So if you're able to measure the US dollar's relative value by looking at another country's oil output or energy production needs, I mean, that's how this poker game of Forex actually works, right? You try to divine meaning from the US dollar, and then you make everything relative to that. So US output, foreign output, etc. And now if they do this commodity-based piece, it will actually affect how the US dollar is measured, because it's going right to the relative measurements of the US dollar, and should have an effect, except the US dollar is actually unbound by these measurements. It's just an abstract idea, and only works if there is only one market for energy, which is the US dollar for oil, which has been the only legal market for oil for 50 or 60 years now. You can't sell oil for euros or gold or yen or won, right? You could sell it for dollars, and you would need yen, won, or whatever to get the dollars to buy the oil. But if you went out and tried to just do a direct, oil for euros, only at the pump, my friends, only at the pump. You can't do that wholesale. You can't do that from the people producing it. But now you can. Since the war, that's been one of the stories, right? Russia actually created a new market for oil. So BRICS is going to continue on that wheat, oil, commodity-based money. US dollar, right, the allies, the all-lies, right? We know what their money is all about. Financial engineering, leverage, collateralization, and its ability to produce money through maturity transformation, right? Maturity transformation being money in, time, money out, greater, right? That's how they do it. Maturity transformation, it's called. Now, what does the Ables do, right? So the Ables, when I think of the Ables, I think of Satoshi, like just humans, right? We're not bound by belligerence as countries. We're not bound by nation states or weird configurations like the EU. We're more like Elon Musk, right? We saw Elon Musk yesterday walk into Twitter holding a sink. Right, did anyone catch that? Right, Elon Musk walking into Twitter headquarters yesterday with a sink. Right, the purchase apparently is going to be finished tomorrow, and the dad joke, right? We love dad jokes on this show, right? Was let that sink in, right? So let that sink in, and he brought a sink into the office. So he's an able, right? This is an able person. This is a person who's set his mind to fixing the world, and now he's got a really important commodity in this fight, which is Twitter. And if he does nothing more, than just welcome back the people that have been kicked off over the years, and just basically makes a terms of use policy, terms of service policy that is a little more flexible, then he doesn't have to do anything. He just lets the company run. It will make money for itself. And even this letter we saw 2 days ago from the Twitter writers, right? Of course, it was mocked yesterday. We talked about it on the show because it's hilarious. You get Twitter folks saying publicly not to discriminate because of political orientation. I mean, you can't write this stuff. This is hilarious. This is clown world at its absolute best. Absolute best. So the ables are able to concoct situations where the clown world just trips on its own big honking shoes, right? That's what it's good at, right? We've got Satoshi there. We've got all of these people. You can put Kanye into that list, right? You can put Kanye into the list. Whatever else people are complaining about, this is an able person who does things that might not seem obvious when you first see them, but as they play out, you start to see that this was an entirely different kind of logic and a different way of seeing the world and manipulating events. So ables are simply individual people unbound by any nationalistic idea, any system that would force them into thinking in a compatible way for the perpetuation of the system and not for the individual. So there's a great individuation that goes on amongst Bitcoiners. And let's compare the money, right? The money of the G's, like I said, is bricks, and then here it's the dollars, which is all engineered and nobody understands any of it, and who knows what's going on, and what did the Fed say, and nobody knows, and it's complicated, right? Versus, right, the money that the ables use. Well, Elon Musk, one of the ables I mentioned, of course, a big Bitcoin holder. The plebs that are part of this ables, right? They're a big part of it, right? The plebs are a big part of this. What's their money? It's literally their body, right? Like custodying money yourself, not using any of the intermediaries, not using a country who's extracting resources at a national level, nationalized level. Like there is no real private oil industry. When I met Boris Nemtsov, the guy that Putin, former prime minister under Yeltsin, right? When I met him in the parliament in Canada, his whole presentation, and this was right around the Pussy Riot time, his whole presentation in parliament was based on how Putin was the richest man in the world because he controlled all the oil resources in the country, and he just hid his extreme wealth in clever ways. But actually, if you added the yachts and the boats and the houses and the mansions and everything, he was by far the richest person in the world, which sounds legit. Like I can't imagine that someone who made a bit of software and did some financial engineering was actually richer than Putin, because Putin had the whole country that he could just manipulate and total control, right? So now I'm not going to go and account for who's richest or not. It just sounded believable to me at the time and remains pretty believable sounding. So the money is, that and controlled by institutions, right? And in America, in the all lies system, of course, it's the same situation. But in Bitcoin, we self-custody, right? There's no one around. You can keep it inside your brain if you really need to, right? You don't even have to have a physical, you don't even need to have a physical manifestation of your money. You're able to put it in your brain and go about your life. And so the way this ends up contrasting is that one system is much simpler. It allows you to count and is, can be physically held inside your person, versus all these other things that require edifices and collective dreams and collective hypnosis in order to perpetuate, right? Our system does not require collective hypnosis in order to perpetuate. It does not, right? Now, info, where do we get our info from, right? Well, in China, there's no info. They don't even know if their GDP is growing. Neither do we, really, but, in America. But, it's all firewall. If you've ever been to China, you know that using the internet there is one of the stupidest things you'll ever do with your time. It's boring. Like, and you can't get used to it. You flip your phone on, and you type in Google or whatever, right? It won't come up. There's no such thing. Nothing. There's nothing like that, right? So you're like, well, how do I even write an email? Like, you don't know. You don't know. You got to buy all these different phones, and it's a big hassle. Terrible, terrible, terrible place to visit for that. Now, what do we have? Well, we have the internet trademarked, right? We have the internet trademark, but the Ables are already attacking that, right? And the Ables with Starlink, right? With Starlink, have an ability to start entering China if things continue to destabilize there. There's a way we can get into that country just through information to change the situation. Imagine the appetite these people must have for information after what they've lived through with the firewall and all that. So I continue to predict that China's got another revolution on its hands, right? And they're not going to be outward looking. It's all inward from now on. They're gonna want better, right? They're gonna want better than they've got. So the All Eyes here have their trademarked internet, which took a big blow, right? It took a big blow when Elon bought Twitter, and there's, you know, with what we're doing in Bitcoin, right? We don't find information in this way, right? We don't get our information from like a firewall system or from some trademark internet. We mine our information, right? We mine our information, and if you mine it in this way, you have the computer science aspect of cleaner information, right? Even from an engineering and physics perspective, you know that the information that's being mined is clean, right? Like, we know that we can trust what the majority of nodes in the Bitcoin network have decided is the truth, right? That's what it is. It's a machine that incentivizes other machines to tell the truth. It's a competition to tell the truth. Now, the frame of true and false is very small. It's did you send the transaction? You know, it's not a whole bunch of stuff. It's not, is it true what this person said, or is it true what that person said? But that doesn't matter. Once you know that just did you send the thing you said you sent, right? That you can count it. Once you can start counting properly, you give meaning to everything else on the internet. Once you can actually count the ones and zeros, you can give meaning to everything else on the internet. If there is one shared layer of truth, which is what we use the public ledger for in Bitcoin. Now, what's the strategy all these folks have to win this whole big fight, right? What's the strategy that each of the belligerents has to win the fight? Well, the strategy that the Axis has, right, the Gs, is mutual assured destruction. Not really a winning strategy, right? It's a not losing strategy, but it's not a winning strategy. You're not going to win with mutually assured destruction, especially not with their demographic problems. If the demographics were still good, totally different game. MAD would work for a generation, and then they would have the population in order to win. But it doesn't look like we'll ever get there, right? If you listen to Peter Gihan, right, their population halves in not 30 years, less than 30 years. They're in big, big trouble. They're not rich enough to be that old, is what Gihan is arguing, right? They're not rich enough to be that old. And his whole argument, again, is that G understands the demographics better than anyone in China, and that's what makes all of the things he's doing recently make sense. If you understood the demographics the way he understands the demographics, you'd have made a lot of similar decisions. So what do the All Eyes need? The All Eyes need growth, right? If this isn't growing, if they actually have to start putting parameters on this, they're in trouble. Now, the good news for the All Eyes is they've got fantastic infrastructure. They've got some ways to move energy around that are better. But don't forget, they've been putting a lot of pressure on themselves to change the things that are good, right? The ESG folks have come in. ESG on top of Wall Street and financial engineering is just a disaster waiting to happen. It's not going to work. I predict that ESG as a topic is dead meat by next spring. You're not even going to want to hear about it. Once we get through the winter in Europe, and we see all the trouble that this has caused, you're going to find out that Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor, who's trying to make a political run in Canada, I believe he's going to try and take over from Trudeau. He's like tweeting and getting involved in local elections and all this stuff. He moved back to Canada, right? But he runs that ridiculous ESG fund out of the UN, the COPA fund, and they say it raised like $120 trillion or something stupid like that for ESG deployment, right? So I continue to make the argument that Mark Carney will become the biggest financial loser in the history of the world. There'll be no one bigger than him because he's going to lose all that 120 trillion. Who else lost 120 trillion dollars in the world? It's only Mark Carney. He is going to be the great, and he's already pretty much there. I mean, do some math, and it's not far to imagine he is the world's greatest financial loser. There's never been a bigger loser financially and economically than Mark Carney, ever. He's the ultimate loser. And I think we're going to find out that, when you put all of your eggs in the basket of people like Mark Carney promising growth, and that's literally your strategy of your side winning, might be a bad one, right? We're entering a new era where consumption, right? We talked about Edward Bernays a lot on the show and everything that came out of World War II and Eisenhower and all that stuff. And this idea that America, to be the strongest military in the world, would only need to be the largest consumer base in the world, right? That was Eisenhower's vision. And because if you were the largest consumer base in the world, you could turn the consumer engine quickly into the military engine in order to win any fight that came up. And it didn't work out the way Eisenhower intended. The fake news began with Kennedy and the missile gap, which was, we have a gap with Soviet Union and missiles. We need more. Eisenhower knew it wasn't true, and it didn't even matter, right? Even if it was true. And then that led into the whole space race. Space race was really just a continuation of missile gap. It was the same technique. It was rocketry, right? So it was rocketry. The whole point was we can win the missile gap by being in space first, because it's the same quality of rocket that will help you win a rocket war versus a race to space. So growth is, big part of it, big part of it. Are they going to get the growth? Well, I mean, there's plenty of industries that are going to grow, nuclear and all that kind of stuff. But are we going to be consuming at the same level? We probably could, but they've brainwashed a whole generation into being more environmental and conscious, and probably for good reason, right? That we do have. I'm not a limit people's consumption type of person, but in the fiat world, the waste became so great because no one knows how to count that we've made a mess. like I don't worry about the global warming thing. Right? I worry about pollution, even though pollution is getting much better in America and Europe and it's coming down. We got to make sure we have systems in place that keep the world clean, right? Of course. But here's what the Abels have in mind, right? So, right, they're individual people, they shine. I tried to put the color into this brain, right? Their money comes from their body, their info is mined, right? The strategy Bitcoiners have of winning World War III is literally just individuation and be a better person. Like if there's enough Bitcoiners and we've all worked on time preference, we are not mindless consumers, we understand how to consume information, how to eat well, how to be healthy, it won't take much of us to win World War III. I mean, really, it won't take much of us, right? I mean, if the best among us continue to go down this path, then the amount of people it will require to bring everyone in is actually not a lot, right? It's actually not a lot. And so that's why the focus that Bitcoiners have on their inward development and inward growth is actually the recipe to win World War III in the short term. Because as long as we don't fall sway to the psyops, to the anger, to the frustrations, this, you know what I did when COVID started? And I recommend this advice to everyone, right? Keep doing this for COVID. When you hear this stuff about the vaccines and the masks and the fighting and the mandates, now I know it's hard. People lost their jobs. They're bitter. They're angry. But for a second, here's the frame I use. I never expected any one of these people to get it right, ever. My clown world view was they would get it all wrong, that there would be absolutely no way to even distinguish good leadership from bad leadership anyway in COVID responses, which is the case, right? You can't see leadership through COVID policies. There's no leadership that strikes through. Some places had some advantages, others didn't, right? People say, oh, the Swedish situation. Don't compare Sweden to America. Sweden is a bunch of super healthy, well-educated people that all have a summer home, that all have a lake house, right? That are so used to being conscientious with each other and thoughtful to each other that there's just no way they can be compared to the chaos of Brooklyn or Harlem or the Bronx. It's not the same planet. It's not even the same planet. It's totally different, right? And so there's no elevators, for example, in Sweden. There's no skyscrapers. They don't have anything like that, right? And they can all just go out to their cottage. You know, Sweden, I've been there. It looks a lot like Canada, and it's the same way. You can't just compare the way Canadians had to deal with this, because the rich Canadians just went to their country houses. Everyone in Canada has a country house. It's cheap. There's so much land. You could just go to some lake and build a shack, and it won't cost you a lot of money. And because there's no one around. There's no one here, right? There aren't 1 billion people on the whole continent, North and South America. There's no one around. The whole thing's empty. The East Coast of the United States, a little busy, a little bit busy. A little bit of the Pacific coast is busy. That's the end of it, right? There's no one around. A little bit of the Brazilian coast. But even Brazil, what, 200 million people? So what? 200 million people is nothing for a country that size, right? It's nothing. And so there's not even 1 billion people in all of America, the Americas, right? Not even 1 billion. So, you know, the way I see it is you've got this whole group here, and I don't see how they can possibly win World War III. I mean, short of massive production of drones, a total swarm of drones that knock out every single US aircraft carrier, somehow get to space, knock out satellites. I mean, it's pretty bleak stuff, right? But maybe it can happen. The Allies, yeah, they could keep clamping down, right? They can keep clamping down on everyone. But if growth isn't achieved, if it's no longer the economic vehicle to get energy to people, right? Which is why I always say that this whole thing, the world changing, US energy companies becoming so powerful, maybe even coordinating on the Nord Stream thing, because they're the ones who, the pipeline, they're the ones who make all the money, you know. All we have to do as Bitcoiners is find a way to finance nuclear energy. I say it all the time in this show. And then we own the energy sector. And American energy companies are incentivized to make us richer and incentivized to perpetuate our system of counting. And if that's done, the energy companies, which they just want money, right? If they join the Ables, it's game over. We win. It's game over. They can't compete with us after that because it's a fiction. No one will spend time there. This is the worst. They're not strong enough. Who cares about this money? You need slaves, right? This is also just a comic book. It's not real, right? It's a comic book. You know, whereas the Ables are focusing on body, mind, soul. That's the formula to win World War III, right? That's it right there. All right, team. Any comments? Oh, Justin says, I recall reading Accidental Superpower years ago, and a lot of his thesis continues to hold true. Too bad. Yeah, that's, I guess, about Peter Zeihan. Yeah, every time he talks about Bitcoin, it's so cringe that it makes me think of his other stuff less. So I force myself to always read his stuff because I don't want to create a bias, because I do think his worldview is pretty valuable and pretty accurate. And when he was the first person that I ever heard say this whole like China taking over thing is dumb, I hadn't heard that before. I hadn't heard anyone put it so bluntly. And when he did it and I started looking into the reasons, I said, I think he's right, actually. Like, I don't, you know, I knew instinctively, having lived over in Asia and Korea and Japan and visiting China many times and being part of early Bitcoin over there and running around, you know, I couldn't, I could never bring myself to believe that China was going to take over. I just couldn't, I couldn't see it, right? Having been there, I just couldn't see it. But you're worried there's a thing you're not seeing and you have a blind spot. But when I read his, it confirmed my own bias. So I will admit, Zeihan is a confirmation bias thing for myself, but also the opposite, because his Bitcoin thing is every time he does this, like, you know, one of his rhetorical tricks, Zeihan, is to kind of laugh because he's so much smarter. And that's pretty devastating in general when you're arguing and you know, mocking the other person is a really good jab, right? So he's got a good jab against Bitcoin. But he sounds ridiculous when he goes on, right? His argument is always, ha ha ha, they're not going to do it. You know, they're so stupid. And he has a lot of faith in institutions, probably because his whole career is based off of speaking opportunities and to say these provocative things. And people, as someone who works in events, right? As someone who works in events and produces events, we think of ourselves, it's like casting, right? You cast a character because you know the lines, the talking points they're going to deliver, and you know what they're going to do, and you know what they're going to say. And so he's also been trained because he gets money from these institutions that want to hear something they haven't heard before. And I don't think he can put it in such extreme terms. I think he's walking a fine line. He's sort of gauged what feedback he gets. But look, his whole thing about the aircraft carriers, China, Europe, all right on. I mean, really accurate stuff, right? And I don't know if he's ever said what I said about moving all American manufacturing capacity to Latin America and rebuilding the Chinese factory in Mexico, bringing jobs, ending American immigration trouble, right? Ending it, right? Ending it, no more. There won't be any more trouble after that. I just think it's inevitable. So Justin says, perhaps it's Gelman amnesia. Yeah, that's a pretty good explanation of what Zihan is missing, I think. But who knows? Maybe he just hasn't. Look, it takes, everyone has a different path to Bitcoin, and it is a shocking reality. Like I get why it's hard for people that have a clear worldview to accept it. If your worldview is already clear and makes sense to you, and you can explain it, you can show. Peter Zihan is one of these people who can like show people his worldview, right? He has it so tight, he can just say, "This is what I think about the world," and it's easy to get, right? So. Bitcoiners can do that too. So that's probably the issue, is that he just can't accept the code into his thing. It's too much reimagination, right? All right, team. I think we covered everything. Oh yeah, I guess there was one other story I didn't really get into. Germany and France are fighting because Germany went to visit China, and what does France think about it? I'd put it along the same Axis and allies, and it's actually one of the more plausible. It's not real, it's not true, but it's a plausible reason why the Americans destroyed Nord Stream. I don't know if America destroyed Nord Stream, right? So I continue to say there is an engineering world or explanation where the Russians did it to themselves by accident, right? That exists, that's out there, you can go look for it. It's about depressurizing the pipelines, and if you hadn't used them, which they hadn't used it for a long time, the pressure builds up, and you can't actually leak it from one end, or you can, but it's dangerous. You got to leak it from both ends to get the air out before you start putting the gas in again. And if you don't do that, if you try from one end, the results they got, the explosions, can happen. Now, I don't know anything about it. I'm not an engineer, a pipeline engineer. I don't know anything about it. So don't quote me on any of that. I just heard the explanation, and to my rude understanding of things, it made sense. But the frame of why do it to Germany? Well, the fear that France has always had, the reason they created the EU in the first place, is to keep Germany from moving to Russia. That's been a preoccupation of European peace for a long time. That if Germany sides with everyone east of them, we have a whole new scenario in Europe and a whole new balance of power. So that's a major issue, right? And it doesn't have to be Russia. If Germany's always had this stupid fixation on China. I remember I went there years ago, and I thought it was over. I took that dumb maglev train in Shanghai. Has anyone ever taken that stupid train? It's the dumbest thing you've ever taken. It's amazing being on it, okay? You get on this train, it goes whatever, 300 miles an hour. They have the speedometer right there, so you know. But it's a train to nowhere. If I could give you an equivalent, if anyone knows New York City, just as an example. So New York City, imagine you landed at JFK, right? You landed at JFK, and you had no, JFK won't work. Let's do, imagine they put the main New York City airport, let's just make a new one, in Yonkers. Put it in Yonkers, right? So way north of New York City, after the Bronx, north of New York City, up the Hudson River. So they put the airport there, you land in Shanghai airport, right? And then that's where this train is. So you get on the train. It doesn't go anywhere. It just shows off its speed, right? It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't get you downtown. It doesn't get you anywhere useful. It's a ride. It's an amusement park ride. And it goes for like 10 minutes, right? So you get on this thing, it's cool when you fly. But doesn't even get you to town. It doesn't even get you into downtown Shanghai. So it would be like going from Yonkers to like Meadowlands where they play the NFL football games. There's no point to it. You're not anywhere. You could just take a taxi from the airport into town and be there by the time that stupid train takes you into the middle of nowhere. So, but the reason I'm mentioning all this is because I took that train and I thought that would be the end of the Chinese-German relationship because the Germans built them that train. And then under the belief that they would build 1 million more of them and fill the whole country. Nope, they built one, stole the tech and said, beat it, Germany. But these dumb Germans, oh no, what are they gonna do? Maybe next time. All right, guys, that's all I got. Thanks, Dex, for saying it's a brilliant episode. You know, we're all Ables, right? We're going to win World War III, right? We're the Ables, right? We're not into the all I's or the G's.